that the Grail stories are probably the most clear story of redemption in the West. Like the stories of fallen Adam being the point where fallen angels and animal natures are reconciled. Division between man and woman. Men are no longer sure about what they have to do or how they should behave. Women have no references. The lady is disappearing more and more, especially in some countries.
Bringing the divine masculine and the divine feminine together, even that could be two sides of a cup that come together.
And he says the Grail was really a jewel from the crown of Lucifer that fell right when he was falling. The stone that the builders rejected became the cornerstone.
It's a perfect metaphor for a spiritual traveler on a path. Right, the knight's horse would represent the physical body, and then the self is inside the armor, clunky and kind of heavy.
The apostles were made fishermen. In ancient times, there were the Anunnaki, and these were represented sometimes like fish, like Oannes, or the Apkallu, the 7 fish gods.
Now the Fisher King is the keeper of the Grail. So, and then you got the allegories of the fish as you was just speaking of. And
well, let's have a chat about the ideas concerning the Holy Grail and the movements that took place in the medieval ages around the 12th, 13th centuries. Because I notice how the old ideas and the old conflicts remain. For instance, the conflict between the Christians and the Muslims is even getting more intense nowadays, despite for a few hundred years, the subject was not so intense after the Crusades. But nowadays it seems because of immigration and other situations like the Twin Towers, the terrorist attacks, not just in the US, but in Europe and other places, that conflict became again intense, as if there was a sort of underground crusade still taking place. So what is really going on? And as I was reinterpreting the old stories of the Grail, Arthur, the Knights, or even the Templars and the Albigensian Crusades against the Cathars, I came to the conclusion this has to do with conflicting natures within the human being. On one side, the fallen angels that infused certain technologies and ideas into the human race, and even a mind and a way of feeling. And then on the other side, well, the animal nature and the human nature, but also the movement of the messianic body, or the body of Christ, as Christians would say, which in some sense comes to transform both the animality and the fallen angelic nature, which is meant to be part of the divine as a restoration or rectification, as some Kabbalists say. So let's start with the idea of the Grail. Have you ever read something concerning the Grail?
yeah, actually, I was reading a little bit this morning about it and brushing up a little bit, but came across a couple interesting points couple views that I never heard of before, and everybody knows the story of the Last Supper in the upper room and the Grail being part of that ritual or scene or process that was taking place there. But now that you mentioned, I found this one. It was The Spiritual Journey in Search of the Holy Grail by Lynn Forrest.
Mm-hmm.
And she interpreted as it's a perfect metaphor for a spiritual traveler on a path. Right, the knight's horse would represent the physical body, and it carries us to our destination through our own directing. We're directing the body from the higher self, and then the self is inside the armor, and the self, the authentic being, is inside the armor, and the armor's clunky and kind of heavy. You know what I mean? Dense, like
Mhm.
dense matter. Yeah, and it's a very very interesting take on the Grail. I don't know. I don't have enough time to go through the whole thing, but maybe we could put a link or something to it, and people could read. And
Yes, I think that's one of the mm, interpretations that obviously are implied. Even in ancient times, there were similar interpretations when there were no knights, but the knights are somehow in tune with those words of Apostle Paul, no? That we have to carry the armor of God, but also with the clanky nature of personality, which is like a rusty knight. Actually, I think there is a book about the the knight of the rusty armor or something like that, concerning the personality. And as I read many of the Grail stories years ago, and I could notice the spiritual teachings implied. No? There is a combination of Celtic lore with Christianity, and also all those ideas concerning the Crusades. But recently I gave it another read, and I realized that the Grail stories are probably the most clear story of redemption in the West, even though that's also implied in the New Testament, because the apostles were made fishermen, and the fish represents not only the righteous souls, but also fallen angels. In ancient times, there were the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, or whatever, and these were represented sometimes like fish, like Oannes, or the Apkallu, the seven fish gods that represented the civilizers, even Osiris, and many figures connected to the fallen angels. So I think the Grail is a compilation of all these ideas and stories from ancient times in reference to the nature of the angels that somehow was inherited by the human race. Actually, the version of the Grail that explains this is the one by Wolfgang von Eschenbach. He was a knight and also a troubadour in the 13th century. And he was writing about Percival, who was one of the knights of the Round Table, serving Arthur. And at some point in the story, he brings the character of Guillaume of Provençal. The Provence was that part of the south in France that collected and gathered troubadours and the Cathars, even secret movements about the lineages of the Messiah and ancient teachings. So Guillaume of Provençal is representing all that. And he says the Grail was really a jewel from the crown of Lucifer that fell right when he was falling. And that's interesting because that jewel somehow represents something that belonged to a royalty in ancient times, but fell, and now it has to be restored. Like the stories of fallen Adam being the point where fallen angels and animal natures are reconciled. So the Grail, I think, would be that nature that somehow can reintegrate all what is fallen. Even elevating the human nature. And some years ago, I even heard that the Grail can be compared to the lower part in the Sephirotic tree. So Malkut, Yesod, Od, and Netzach. That will be the gap, receiving the divine influence, which transforms, obviously, the nature that receives. Because that's exactly what fallen angels did not want to do. They did not want to bow down before Adam, as the story says. Especially in the Muslim world or in the Yazidi tale. The Yazidis were worshippers of the peacock angel. It's a symbol of the fallen angel because the peacock, as you know, has a tail with symbolic eyes and many colors, like the fallen ego, which is full of divisive eyes and also colors, deceptive colors, or the so-called serpentine perceptions, which are full of distortions. So those stories are about a group of beings who did not want to serve. And in the Quran, also, Iblis refuses to bow down before Adam, and he becomes the shaitan. Even though the Muslims don't establish a parallel or don't equate shaitan with the angels. They say the angels are of a different nature than Iblis. Something which, in a sense, it's true if we are referring to the higher rank angels, no? Those who are closer to the divine throne. But if we take the word angel as messenger, well, even an angel is living within us. So I think those ancient Grail stories are an amazing restoration view, which was not fully understood, neither in those days and today, where everything is mixed up. But I think it's time to bring the truth, because if you notice, the greatest conflicts nowadays are on one side, the division between man and woman. Men are no longer sure about what they have to do or how they should behave. Women have no references. And of course, if men do not develop, don't become knights, so to say, women cannot be protected and cannot develop themselves either. So the figure of the lady is disappearing more and more, especially in some countries. That on one side. On the other side is the problematic of Christians against Muslims. Because in the Grail stories, they also fight. For instance, in the story of Percival, the version of Wolfgang von Eschenbach, Percival sets out into the woods to become a knight, and he meets a Muslim half-brother, which he ignores. He doesn't know he's half-brother, but he fights with him.
The black and white knight.
Yes. And at some point, they realize they are half-brothers.
Yes.
And they embrace themselves, and they both go to the court of Arthur. They get ready, and then they go to the Grail Castle. And in the Grail Castle, well, Percival is accepted, of course, but there is a dilemma, because Muslims cannot be accepted into the Grail Castle. So this half-brother, Feirefis, recognizes the importance of the Grail, and he marries the lady that carries the Grail, and he even becomes a Christian. I'm not sure Muslims would like that version of the story. It's speaking about the reconciliation, of course.
Right, which is great.
Yes.
Which is the idea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, I did read that this morning, where Percival went into the forest and and at first he ran into the Red Knight, and he defeated the Red Knight and took his armor, and then which is really another interesting point is that the Fisher King. Now the Fisher King is the keeper of the Grail. So, and then you got the allegories of the fish, as you was just speaking of, and he's the keeper of the Grail. He's actually a king with no kingdom. I read, and he's in the middle of the lake, and he could hardly walk or defend himself, and he's looking for the righteous one to come back and restore the his legs and his kingdom, and he's the Fisher King, the keeper of the Grail, you know. And then further on in the story, the Percival bumps into the Black and White Knight, and they're fighting, and the Black and White Knight, he said, we're the same. He come to this premonition, I guess you want to call it, comes over him and says, no, we're the same. We're one, he says, I'm ready to kill myself. I rode in here to kill myself, and you was ready to kill me, and then, as you said, they reconciled and rode off together. So I think that's the as you have the Grail, and it's a vessel, it's a cup, you know, portrayed as in a lot of stories, and you have that mixture in there, you know what I mean? You have that mixture in there, and you're just trying to get to see what's you know, it's like almost like a alchemical process, you know. Then you want to see what bringing the divine masculine and the divine feminine together. Even that could be two sides of a cup that come together. Like, even like if you have a cup, you know, a cup you could almost view as two-sided, you know, and that vessel brings it all together, you know. That's the vessel that holds the divine masculine and divine feminine and bring them together, you know.
Yes, exactly. Actually, I think when we are speaking about the Grail as the receptacle of the messianic blood, so to say, we are referring to the astral body. The astral body is that body that emerges or is generated out of the seed, the fish in the human body, and that grows, stabilizing our divine double, or the part of ourselves which is witnessing. So just as we have a physical body that contains the vital soul, we also need subtle bodies, the astral body and the mental body, and even the primordial body, in order to receive deeper degrees of soul. So obviously the Grail is receiving both the messianic blood or nature and that fallen nature that can be restored, so to say. And I think this is mentioned when the Fisher King is somehow waiting for healing, because in the stories he is wounded in his groin, because in his youth he tried to use the spear without maturity, and he wounded in his parts. In other versions, he is even fighting a Saracen or a Moor, and he is wounded in his parts. So that might be an allusion to the wrong use of the sexual energy, for instance. And then when he gets wounded, his land gets desolated, the famous wasteland. And the Grail Castle is in the middle of this wasteland where there is poverty, there is darkness. And I think it's very clear when he's fishing in the river, and then he meets Percival, invites Percival. This is in the first version of the Grail stories, at least the version of Chrétien of Troyes. And in that version, Percival is very naive. He's invited to the Grail Castle, and right before dinner, he sees a procession of people carrying some objects, sacred objects. I think it
The
was a
spear with the
candle.
blood,
Exactly,
the
a
spear
spear.
that bleeds. Yeah,
Exactly. There is a lady carrying the Grail, but as Percival was very naive, he didn't ask about the Grail because he had the mission, so to say, to become a true knight and heal the Fisher King. Then later on, a lady tells him that he failed in asking the right question about the Grail, which was whom the Grail is serving, or what's the purpose of the Grail. But he didn't even wonder what that was. Or he wondered, but he was not brave enough to pose the question because he was advised not to be very talkative, to remain quiet. But the lesson is that sometimes we have to speak in life. We have
absolutely.
to say something when we are required to say something.
Yes.
Because words are healing. That's part of the story as well. The word
Yeah.
is the healing element.
Yeah. I mean, that's a reference to the master. He is the living word, you know. He's the
Exactly.
yeah. So yeah, and it is fearful. I mean, some people when you see the Holy One or God, whatever you want to say, as a vengeful father or a dictator, you're scared to ask the questions because you're like, oh, if I ask this question, I might seem disrespectful or naive or however you want to say it. But really, it's a it's not a king servant relationship. It's a father child relationship, and a child is always open.
Asking.
Yeah, always asking, "Hey, what's this? What's that? What is it? What is it? What is it?" You're like, ah, and that's why I think we're called to still be mature in our growth and in our person, but still don't lose that childlike faith. Don't become uh I don't know how you want to call it. Don't become stagnant, you know. Always keep that joy and that wonder, you know, because when you're a kid, you could fly and you're invincible and all this and it's true because you believe it. But you get older and like the world keeps on piling stuff on you and you kind of it try to takes your glow, you know, try to takes your glow from you and I think that's why they have these stories like the Grail, because to keep that alive, to keep that childlike wonder alive, and so you're always you're searching, and it's like a treasure hunt, you know, because it's a treasure what we're searching for, and what's already there. But you know, in a treasure, you have to ask the questions. You got to be open to receive the answers, the correct answers, and you got to get a little dirty. You got to get some dirt under your nails, and you got to do some digging, and there's work to be done, you know. But it's not like painstaking work. It's like a it's an enjoyment. It's an adventure. It's a odyssey. It's a great quest, just like the quest for the Grail, you know. And I think that's why they keep these stories alive, and you have all these different versions because people are subtly trying to wake you up a little bit, if you would, trying to open you up a little more to receive the understanding of what they're trying to say, you know.
That's it. Actually, I think there seems to be like an evolution of unveiling from the first stories of the Grail with Geoffrey of Monmouth. He was a clergy from, I think it was Wales, and he wrote the first Historia Britannica, and there he starts writing about Arthur, the typical story, about Lancelot falling in love with Ginevra, the princess that became later on the promised wife of Arthur. But from those stories, there was an evolution later on with Chrétien of Troyes writing the Percival and other stories, where he starts telling the stories of Galahad or Percival, Sir Gawain, which, by the way, have something to do with the pole star. Arthur is one of the boreal constellations or stars. Actually, I was contemplating that star when I was a kid without knowing it was Arthur. I was fascinated by it
Yeah.
because it's very intense. It has many colors: greens, reds, oranges, yellows, and I wonder why is that star so bright, and without knowing it was an emblem in Europe.
Wow.
And Sir Gawain, I think it might have to do with the Wayne, the Ursa Major,
Yep.
the Big Dipper, as it's also called. It's also called the Wayne.
Okay.
Like in the supermarket,
Yeah.
the carts where you carry food
Yeah. Yes.
are wagons or wains. So Sir Gawain seems to be an allusion to those constellations, which obviously might be an origin of Adamic souls. And many souls came from different star systems
Right.
to evolve in this planet. So that the 12 knights of the round table are like the 12 tribes of Israel.
Right.
Or an extension of that. No?
Yeah. I think
And
too maybe they write these allegories or stories to maybe take some of the religion out of the story, because you people get caught up in that religion and they put themselves in that box and they can't see out of that box. So when you introduce it in a different way, the story, the truth, when you introduce the truth in a different way, then it opens it up for more people to receive it. Because in religion, we always have the infighting that starts, in the religion, where you have your sects within inside the sect, and you have the religions going back and forth with each other. So I think maybe they introduce these stories with the same pieces, with the same truth, but in a
archetypes.
different. Yeah, with that. Thank you. So that's another way of presenting it to people. So because some people with religion, they don't want to get involved, or when they do get involved, they put themselves in that box, and it kind of closes you off from the truth sometimes.
Yes, that happened in almost every mythology. In ancient Greece, you have Ulysses going back to Ithaca, finding that his house has been invaded by suitors that want to marry his wife, but only the one who is able to bend the bow will marry. So none of the suitors was able to bend the bow except Ulysses, that took his old bow and he killed the 12 suitors one by one. So
That's
the
kind of
bow
yeah,
is like in the story of the Buddha, no? The string must not be neither too tense nor too loose. So that there must be a middle virtue, reconciling the streams, the opposites.
wow,
And in ancient Greece, the bow with the arrow is a symbol of Harmonia.
yeah,
So I think those archetypes are obviously
yeah,
operating within these stories.
yeah. And Arthur with Excalibur, with the sword, the only one able to
Yes,
pull the sword out, and
actually, I wrote an article some years ago concerning that expression, Excalibur. Ex is from, Kali is like the goddess Kali of destruction, this world. And Ibur is the gestating soul in Kabbalah.
Yeah.
Excalibur is getting the Ibur out of this crazy chaos.
See, it's all there. It's all right there, and that's why they
Yeah.
use these stories, and
Mhm.
for them the different archetypes, and it's just beautiful, and like you
It's
said, it's great to revisit them. It's great to
mhm.
revisit them, and because it gets deeper and deeper, your understanding becomes deeper and deeper as you revisit it. Like the first time you read it on the surface, and like that treasure, and every time you revisit it, it's just deeper and deeper. The next step and next step and next step, and it's
Mhm.
like the unfolding. It's the beauty in it all.
Exactly. Yes, I think it's impossible to conceive this has been just an invention. So it was the result of esoteric groups working in certain areas, in certain periods, and they gather what they have around and they release these stories as part of what Gurdjieff would call influences B, because the influences A are just from the world,
Mm,
but influences B are those who come from influences C. C is direct transmission from teacher to follower, or like master issue teaching to the apostles, and then they bring the Gospels or the New Testament,
right.
which became part of influences B, a sort of philosophy, doctrines of religion, but you need to go to access influences C in order to have a direct transmission from within and from those who are in contact with living work. And in Europe, there was that kind of work at that time, because it's very interesting to see how in certain periods of time when humanity is in a great risk of being
Mm,
destroyed, there is an upheaval of wisdom.
yes.
Something is opened,
Thank you.
and
Thankful.
mhm,
Yeah.
right now we are living that. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see it like what the Romans come and chase the esoteric teachings out of their territory, and Egyptians let the esoteric teachings out of their territory with the Israelites or the Hebrew nation leaving out of there. And
mhm,
then it come over to Europe, and then it took a boat over,
mm,
and it's like, then you got the Western philosophy, but I think like as you said, the groups, they come together, and there's a singularity behind them all, that that is the truth. That is the truth, and it just tries to get it out there in many different shapes and forms for everybody to have an opportunity to understand it and to be fed by the truth, because everybody don't enjoy a night story, so maybe we'll have this story, you know what I mean?
mm.
Or vice versa, so.
Yes, even
And
though
it's
yes, go on.
no, go ahead, please.
Okay, but the stories of the Grail have been so successful that even nowadays you still have novels and movies about them,
Yeah.
which are remakes of the remakes of remakes. So,
Yeah, and people are still searching for it, like a
mhm,
physical Grail,
yes,
so yeah.
or a physical lineage from Jesus, like in the Da Vinci Code, which I think is a
Right.
very distorted interpretation. Yeah, there are legends about Mary Magdalene going into southern France and
Right.
having the child that supposedly say she had with issue. Well, I don't think that's the case, but if we are going to interpret as spiritual lineage, that might be closer to the truth.
Right.
Why not? Because the lineage of the master is not biological, it's spiritual.
Absolutely.
And
that could be the Holy Grail of
yes,
of Mary coming in and carrying that spiritual lineage as a, you know, and sharing that, and that's a Holy Grail. The whole holding that, because as she was, if you could present the argument that she was the beloved disciple, the closest one to the master, and received all, all his teachings, very personal, very personable, and that would be the Holy Grail that's holding all that them teaching the truth, the essence, in that form, in her form.
Actually, the cup was always a symbol in the stories, of the New Testament, many times. And Mary Magdalene is, symbolically speaking, represented as a vessel sometimes, as the receptacle or the tower. The tower is also a place where you protect something. And according to the Testament of Philip, she was the koinonos of Master Ishu. The koinonos is the companion, even the close pair or partner. Because koinonia in Greek is communion. So koinonos is someone that has communion with someone else. And she appears to be even in a different level than the apostles. Because Peter is jealous of her. And he said, why do you treat her like that? Because she's just a woman. And he said that, but I will turn her into a man, into Adam. Adam, strictly speaking, is someone that is not man or woman in the biological sense, but spiritually speaking, a man or someone that has developed that masculinity is someone that can command with will, discernment, consciousness, and then obviously the feminine qualities like love, compassion, intuition, creativity, care.
Yes. That's
the
beautiful.
equilibrium.
That's the harmonia. Yeah, that's that beauty of that's that balance. That's what we all are attaining. Looking to attain.
There is even a further detail, which is how can a woman become a true woman, and how can a man become a true man? Some would say, well, the man has to develop more feminine qualities, so he has to be more feminine, and the woman more masculine, but I think that's wrong. Because the man can only develop his feminine side by focusing on his masculinity first. So his discernment, support, protection, attention, proactivity, willingness. Then he develops his intuition, creativity, loving care, and the other way around. So the woman can only develop discipline and discernment, attention, when he focuses on his feminine nature. So care,
yes.
Lovingness.
That makes perfect sense.
I think that's the reason why men and women have to work together. It's impossible to develop without the opposite as an inspiration or support. And the world is like is full of confusion of genders and conflicts of men and women. 70% of divorce in the world, especially in the West, precisely because the roles are mixed up. People no longer know what they should do in a family. Men are very passive. In many occasions, is the woman the one that is
wears the pants,
yes,
so to say.
she's bringing support to the family, and the man is in the sofa watching TV, drinking alcohol. That's totally dysfunctional.
Yeah, that's dysfunction.
Mm.
As you was just saying, it takes the total masculine to recognize the feminine side, and it takes the total feminine to recognize their masculine side. And when you're in that, you know, you don't always see it, but like you saying, you know, it feels like, you know, men feel like they have to be more feminine. Masculinity has to gain some femininity, but it's really the opposite, because which we come to find out when we're dealing with the world, it's usually the opposite of what is portrayed is the truth. You know, it's somewhere in there that they put a little twist on it somehow. You know,
Mm.
but yeah, you do see a lot of that going on now, and that's part of the confusion. And as we know, you know, it projects to the outside world, and that's why the world seems like such a mess. You know,
Mhm.
I heard it said it's not how you know when it's over, when it's all good. It's not over till it's all good, and it's not good until it's all over. So
Mhm.
at least we know we know that it's all good, and we know the end result is going to be goodness, you know. And it's a little bit of bitterness in the cup. I don't know, you know, it's just like a little bit of
Mm.
bitterness in the cup that it's just like, just don't taste
Yeah,
right.
the Grail has mixed up wine.
Yeah, there you go. Yes,
like the serpent, no, in the Proverbs of Solomon, Proverbs
yes,
9, the
yep.
serpent built up her own house, raised her 7 pillars, set the table, mix up her wines. So
Oh man.
different bloods, different influences. But Adam was meant to reconcile them all. So, it's not that there was an accident. I think,
Right.
as even in Kabbalistic teachings, they say the fall of Adam was meant to be, because
Wow.
there could be no understanding of what a
Reconciliation.
fall is. Yes, you
Yeah.
have to fall in order to understand what that is.
That's what they say. You have to hit rock bottom to finally notice. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And I always love
Yes.
that one part of the one scripture that said, "Oh, woe to man who falls on the rock, but but
Mhm.
but really woe to those who the rock falls on them, because they be utterly
Yes.
destroyed." You know, so the
Mhm.
falling on the rock ain't a terrible thing. You know what I mean? So it gives you an opportunity. And that goes way back to the beginning of when we started the conversation, of you saying, when Lucifer hit the rock, a rock fell out. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So that's like, yeah, all the clues and keys are there, you know. And they keep presenting themselves in different ways. And but yeah, the Grail is one that holds that holds that place. You know, it's a steadfast story that's known all around the world, and in a couple different versions, and it just, you know, it carries the truth. It
Mhm.
carries the truth within it.
Even the phrase from, I think it's the Psalms of David, or the stone that the builders rejected became the cornerstone, which is in the end the body of the Messiah.